woke to the sun hanging low, its feeble light spilling like cold honey over the brittle cliffside. The dry heat had already begun to seep into your exposed skin, a slow burn that neither comforted nor harmed. Around you, the sparse leaves twisted and crackled under a harsh wind that knew no mercy, scraping against the cracked earth and each other like old bones rubbing. The sandy ground beneath your boots, littered with slick, sun-bleached stones, was unyielding, a hungry thing waiting for your tired steps to falter. From this lonely precipice, the vast ocean stretched endlessly, swallowing the horizon in slow, rhythmic gulps. Your task awaited, the ceaseless hunt for the deadly bees that had claimed these cliffs as their fortress. Your calloused fingers gripped the rough cloth wrappings you had fashioned, your sole defense against the venomous strike that could end everything. Before beginning the ascent, you perform the same quiet ritual, sharpening your worn tools, the harsh scrape of stone against metal, cutting through the stillness, echoing softly like a distant heartbeat. The faint drone of the nervous hive hung in the air above the dry scent of sweat and dust, your eyes scanning every crevice in the hardened rock for the hidden threat. Every movement was weighed and deliberate. One misstep could invite fatal consequences. Yet, there was a numbness to this rhythm, a monotonous certainty that wrapped itself around your consciousness like the brittle wind itself. The endless cycle bound you, a slow dance between survival and surrender. The pale blue of dawn dimmed into a muted gray as the sky flickered under the sun's tentative gaze, reminiscent of old photographs that had faded with time. The crisp, salt air mingled with the faint scent of smoke from a distant, unseen hearth, an echo of life in a place seemingly abandoned. Your rough-spun garment clung to your skin, worn and frayed, but sufficient against the sharp kiss of the morning chill. The tremor in your hand, slight yet insistent, was a silent companion to the calm that pressed over the cliffs. This place was a world apart from the constant buzz of modern life, where even a dead phone battery could send a shiver of panic. Here, the absence of anything was the rule, the slow passing of shadows the only measure of time. You felt the rawness of that truth with each breath, the vast quiet, broken only by the sighing wind and the occasional distant skitter of stone beetles across cracked surfaces. You moved again, tracing the slow ascent up. Fractured ledges, every scrape of leather against rock, every careful placement of foot recorded in your mind with exhaustive detail. The task absorbed you fully, a thin thread of hope shining through the weariness, a spark that in moments like these felt like a luxury stolen from time itself. Suddenly, the distant chorus of dog barks ceased abruptly, as if swallowed by the cliffside itself. your ears strained against the hush that followed. Nearby, a subtle exchange of glances passed between neighbors, unspoken but taut with tension, as though a silent warning had sprung up like a hidden thorn beneath calm waters. And with that quiet signal, the weight of the hunt tightened around you anew. The hive waited, and so did the cliff. Hey, before Morpheus takes you fully, take a quick check to make sure you're still subscribed. For some, the button disappeared, and I don't want you missing the next sleepy stories. Take advantage and leave a like soft as a pillow. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Your interaction keeps this little corner of calm alive. Thanks for being part of it. You shifted your weight carefully, the dry gravel crunching softly beneath your boot. Each small sound magnified in the stillness. The wind, relentless and unyielding, carried the faint thrum of the hive overhead, a low vibration settling deep into your chest. A subtle tremble crept through your fingers, the rough cloth bindings around your hands, both shield and reminder. One careless moment here, and the sting could bring everything to an abrupt, unforgiving halt. You paused, breathing in slow, measured draws, tasting the sharp salt of the sea air mingling with faint traces of dust and dried herbs crushed underfoot, a scent both ancient and oddly familiar. Ahead, the cliff's face sheared upward in jagged tiers, worn smooth in places by the steady passage of water long past, but scarred now with deep fissures. Your gaze traced the twisted vines clinging to those cracks, fibrous and brittle, their leaves trembling in the wind like fragile whispers caught in a secret. Each step was a conversation with the rock, a delicate negotiation between fragility and steadfastness. The sun hung behind a thin veil of cloud now, casting muted shadows that undulated as the air shifted, the landscape breathing quietly beneath a sky too vast to hold. You reached for your tools once more, fingers grazing the familiar shapes worn by countless days like this. The scrape of stone against metal was a soft, persistent sound, a rhythm to your movements that steadied the quickening pace of your heart. Your eyes narrowed, scanning every minute crevice where the bees might lurk. The honeycomb fortress, both a treasure and a trap. The dry heat seemed to press in around you, making your skin taut and the air inside your throat rough. You felt the pulse along your wrist, slow and certain, despite the nervous tension knotting your muscles. With cautious precision, you began your ascent, shifting your weight slowly, deliberately, feeling each rock underfoot, testing its balance before committing your full pressure. The rough surface scraped gently at your palms and calves through thin fabric, an incessant reminder that no part of this climb would be easy or forgiving. The scent of resin, warm and sticky, rose faintly from somewhere above, thrilling and threatening all at once. A sudden gust pulled at the edges of your garment, sending a whisper of chill down your spine, making you involuntarily tuck your chin. From somewhere near the cliff's rim came a faint murmur, birds settling into their morning routines, a distant call that caught at the edges of your awareness, but did not break your focus. You forced your thoughts back to the stones beneath your boots, to the fragile stillness that could shatter at the smallest brush or sound. Each breath was careful, deliberate. The sun swayed behind another cluster of clouds, dimming the light and cooling the heat, as if the day itself were reluctant to progress. A long moment stretched between you and the hive, the space filled only with the gentle pulse of buzzing far above, resonating like distant thunder rolling softly over a hollow hill. You touch the ledge above your head, fingers brushing against the dry, knotted wood of wind-shattered branches tangled in the rocks, their needles brittle and scattering like dust at your slightest touch. Your hand closed around the edge of a rough stone, the texture uneven and unforgiving, the friction grounding your movement. You balanced, exhaling slowly as your foot found a narrow crevice to settle into. The gravity of silence surrounded you. No sudden shifts or crashes, only the measured rhythm of your body playing out against the landscape's harsh elegance. The memories of earlier days, the dry taste of sweat, the pounding of your pulse, the constant vigilance, floated briefly at the edges of your consciousness before fading into the background like an old song. In the distance, the sea's endless waves sighed against the cliff's base, a soft cadence that seemed to mark the passing of time more reliably than any clock. You felt the cold tingle of salt mist catching your breath intermittently, a cooling balm against the heat baked into your skin. The world here was stripped to essentials: rock, wind, sky, and the slow, terrifying clarity of survival. As you inched closer to the hive's heart, the steady drone thickened, a living resonance that wrapped around your arms and shoulders. The bees' faint, persistent chorus was a warning and a call, a barrier you must dance around with precise steps, every muscle tensed, every sense sharpened to its limits. The cliff seemed to hold its breath alongside you, the ancient stone walls bearing silent witness to your quiet defiance. Then, a sudden subtle shift. The stillness fractured as a delicate shadow flickered across the sun-bleached rock. Your pulse quickened, hairs rising with the electricity of anticipation. The faint sound of wings cut through the drone, sharp and swift, brushing past your cheek like a fleeting ghost. You steadied yourself, the roughness of the cloth binding against your skin, a familiar anchor. The edge of the hive came into view, its honeycomb dark and pulsing with latent life, each cell a fragile cavity holding potential peril. You noticed something unusual, a slight tremor in the structure, a quiver that wasn't quite the ordinary rhythm of clamor. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if charged with a hidden tension. You paused, your breath shallow but controlled, heart pounding in a measured storm behind ribs that ached with fatigue. The cliffside whispered warnings in every creak and groan, the clever play of light and shadow shifting like secret messages meant only for you. The wind picked up, carrying a faint scent, a trace of smoke, distant and elusive, curling into the salt air like a thin thread from some unseen place. Your eyes narrowed against the glare, scanning the horizon where the jagged silhouette of cliffs met the restless ocean. Somewhere beyond, the sound of crashing waves masked another, quieter noise, a distant, irregular tapping, faint and rhythmic. Your muscles coiled with the subtle knowledge that this hunt was far from over. The slow dance persisted, every moment stretched into eternity by the weight of silence and the patience of shadows. You steadied your gaze, fingers tightening around your tools, as the hive pulsed softly, an ominous heartbeat against the brittle cliff. And then, just beyond the edge of sight, a flicker of movement caught your eye, a figure standing motionless, blending into the muted colors of rock and wind. Watching, you froze for a moment, your breath caught in the hollow of your chest, as the figure remained still beyond the fractured edge. The hazy colors of rock and dust blurred its outline, a shifting mirage stitched into the scars of the cliff, almost indistinguishable from the jagged stone. For a stretch longer than seemed natural, you allowed your body to hold still, muscles taut but unmoving. The wind pressed cold against your exposed skin, carrying with it the faint rustle of dry branches and the soft, unsteady hum of the hive still alive above. Slowly, the sun dipped behind yet another wisp of cloud, the feeble light retreating behind a curtain of muted gray that seemed to pull the colors of the world inward, desaturating everything into a wash of dull ochres and pale blues. You blinked, the faint sting of salt in your eyes mingling with the sharp edge of fatigue gnawing at your mind. The cliff's face beneath your boots felt impossibly solid, a stubborn foundation holding the brittle world together. And yet, beneath that surface lurked all the fracture and uncertainty of a fragile moment stretched taut. You shifted your stance, a dry gravel crunching faintly beneath, a fragile symphony in the quiet vastness. The figure moved then, a breath slow and deliberate, stepping just enough to pivot on a worn heel, head tilting as if to examine your presence with quiet calculation. The heavy silence wrapped around you, thick like the dust that clung to your skin, and the distant thrum of bees pulsed hungrily in the air, a relentless heartbeat that you felt in your bones. Your fingers traced the coarse weave of the cloth bindings tight around your hands, rough, dependable, a thin armor against the unseen sting that lurked between the shadows. You flexed them slowly, feeling the calluses press into the delicate fabric, grounding your wandering thoughts. The scent of resin drifted up again, mixed faintly with the tang of burning wood from somewhere beyond the ridges, an echo of life in the vast stillness. The cliff seemed to hold its breath with you. The brittle vines shivered, scraping against the rock like whispered warnings. Somewhere far off, the rhythmic tapping you had caught before echoed once more, a slow Morse in the hush, and the sea below sighed its endless song, waves lapping quietly and persistent. Like a gentle pulse, keeping time with your own. You told yourself to wait, to watch, every fiber of your being tensed to catch the smallest hint of movement or sound. Each breath came in measured drifts, tasting the sharp salt air, the faint dust of crushed leaves underfoot, and the wild bitterness of dried herbs tangled invisibly around your ankles. The sun slipped lower still, tendrils of gray casting long shadows that stretched and slipped like ghostly fingers across the jagged terrain. Your foot rested carefully on a narrow ledge, but texture uneven and coarse, its edges worn thin by countless years of wind and rain. The roughness scraped lightly against your skin, beneath the fragile thread of your garment, reminding you mercilessly of every imperfection. You pressed your palm to the stone nearby, tracing the lines etched deep into its surface, each one a story, a quiet testament to endurance and slow change. The low drone of the hive thickened, heavy as distant thunder rolling across sleeping hills. The bee's presence pulsed like a slow and steady drum, filling the space around you with tension almost too subtle to grasp. You felt it coil tightly in your chest, the delicate balance of patience and impending risk tightening its grip. A faint breath of wind brushed past your cheek, cool and palpable, carrying with it the scent of salt and smoke, the faintest trace of something unfamiliar, a whisper like a secret held just beyond reach. Your eyes flicked toward the horizon, where the soft silhouette of distant cliffs lingered, edged by restless waves. The tapping had grown louder, less certain perhaps, as if the rhythm faltered in the growing dusk. The figure took another slow step, the faintest rustle blending seamlessly with the sighing wind. You risked a slow blink, meeting the shadowed shape standing poised among the stones, their stillness a mirror of your own. Yet something beneath the surface, something unseen and pulsing, trembled with a quiet eagerness, a readiness waiting to unfold. You tightened your grip on your tools once more, feeling their worn edges bite gently into your palms like whispers of comfort in the cold air. Your gaze traced every minute detail of the hive itself, the honeycomb cells, dark and swollen, subtly trembling as if breathing, alive with latent menace and precarious beauty. The cliffside seemed to pulse with a slow, ancient rhythm, the earth and stone holding secrets older than memory. Time stretched, elongated into a delicate, tension. The world reduced to shifting light and fragile sounds. The slow crush of gravel, the beating wings of those deadly bees, the whisper of wind against dry leaves. Your breath escaped in quiet clouds, mingling with the salt-sweet air. The sun now hovered just below the horizon, casting a thin, cold light that barely touched the cliff's cracked edges. And then, just when the silence threatened to become unbearable, a sudden, almost imperceptible movement caught the corner of your eye. A flash of fabric, darker than the stones, a silhouette shifting ever so slightly, disappearing behind a jagged boulder like a ghost pulled back into the earth. Your heart stalled, the slow drum of your pulse echoing in your ears, as the distant tapping ceased abruptly, swallowed by the growing dusk. The air thickened, every breath a measured step toward an unknown edge. Somewhere deep below, the ocean sighed its eternal lament, vast, relentless, and waiting. The cliff waited, the hive waited, and in the fading light, so did the shadow, watching you from where it lingered, poised between flight and stillness, its intent as unreadable as the cold horizon. The figure dissolved into the horizon's muted palette, leaving you perched on the ragged edge, muscles taut and senses sharp. The fading light brushed the cliff in a wash of dusky blue and pale ochre, the colors slipping softly like watercolors bleeding into paper. The sea beneath sighed its steady, tireless song, a vast breath that seemed to measure time itself, slow and unavoidable. Your breath was shallow, but steady, tasting the lingering salt and smoke, a faint bitterness clinging to the back of your tongue. The rough cloth wrappings around your hands radiated a faint warmth against the chill creeping into your skin as the sun slipped lower. The hive's drone, once almost a low storm, now softened to a persistent hum that vibrated through your bones, a constant pulse tethering you to the moment. With careful carelessness, you shifted weight, the dry gravel crunching underfoot, a fragile fracture of sound in the vast silence. Each footfall was deliberate, deliberate enough for the stones beneath you to hold without betrayal, but slow enough to feel the grit grind between the soles of your boots. The fissures in the cliffside secreted brittle leaves that broke at your touch, the faintest crumble of dry green. You inhaled deeply, the scent layering, resin, salt, and smoke curling together, an ancient perfume, both dangerous and strangely comforting. A cold edge of wind spiraled upward, threading through the tattered edges of your garment, biting against bare skin and raising goose flesh along your forearms. You pulled the fabric closer, tasting the dust and salt, the breath of wind carrying faint sounds far off, the distant crash of waves against the cliff's base, a whispering murmur tangled with the faint rhythm of tapping fingers striking dry stone. The tapping persisted, subtle but unwavering, a tendril of worry coiling inside your chest. Your fingertips brushed against the rough granite near the hive's heart. The honeycomb's dark cells trembled faintly in the twilight, shadows flickering deep inside, like the breath of some ancient beast stirring from rest. The air around you thickened, heavy with latent menace and fragile beauty, the promise of sudden movement suspended in stillness. You took a slow step forward, muscles flexing with precise tension. As you tested the reach of your balance, the brittle vines scraped faintly against the rock face, like whispering fingers brushing your cheek in warning. The slow and steady drone of bees wrapped around you like a living cloak, their latent energy a menace barely contained. Your breath mingled with the chill, cold air filling your lungs, a sharp contrast to your heated skin damp with sweat. For a long moment, you simply listened to the wind's sigh in the dry branches, to the distant ocean's relentless murmur, to the tapping that seemed to call out in codes only your weary mind might decode. Your heart echoed each thrum of sound, a somber rhythm echoing the hive's steady pulse above. The cold dusk settled deeper, shadows pooling in crevices and hollows, swallowing color and light until the world was a tapestry of muted grays and soft black. Then a subtle change, almost imperceptible. The tapping faltered for a second, like a breath held too long, then resumed with hesitant irregularity. Your eyes scanned toward the sea's restless line, catching a flicker of movement near the base of a jagged rock. Something low and dark shifted. Quick, uncertain, a shadow slipping through the dying light. The hairs on your neck rose, a spidery shiver running down your spine. You tightened your grasp on your tools, fingers curling until the coarse fabric of the bindings dug gently into your skin. A reminder of fragility and resilience tangled together. The promise and peril intertwined, each moment stretched taut, like the thin thread of a spider's web, catching the last rays of sunlight before the night claimed them. A faint crack, soft as a sigh, echoed from the cliff face above. A stone shifting, settling, or something else abandoning its long stillness. The hive's drone wavered, heightening the tension, pressing a slow drumbeat against your ribs. Your eyes flicked back to the honeycomb, the cells pulsing with a quiet life, each holding stories and dangers hidden in their dark depths. You swallowed the dry lump building in your throat, feeling the fragile boundary between boldness and caution as you moved again. The cliff's ledges welcomed your careful touch, the rough stone mapping every groove and fissure to your palms, as if sharing secrets in silence. The breeze carried a faint, unsettling scent, smoke curling, more present now, an acrid ribbon threading through the salty mist. You glimpsed the silhouette again, a shadow coalescing beyond the ridge, watching, not moving, only watching. Its dark fabric rippled faintly with the wind, blending but distinct against the soft shades of stone and sky. Your breath stalled, the tension weaving tighter, like wires drawn taut, humming with quiet urgency. In that suspended moment, the world contracted to the narrow space between breaths and heartbeat, the pressing weight of waiting, watching. Your fingers trembled imperceptibly, the coarse cloth binding a small comfort wrapped like armor around your hands. The distant tapping ceased. Silence filled its place, and the ocean sighed long and low, a slow exhale fading into endless dusk. Then, faint but unmistakable, a whisper riding the wind, a sound not of this place, something shifting just beyond sight. The figure turned suddenly, stepping back into shadows deeper than the twilight. You caught a glint of something glimmering faintly in the dying light, metal or glass, reflecting the last rays like a glimmering eye watching back. Your heart hammered, the slow drumbeat inside you synchronizing with the pulse of the hive and the breath of the sea. The cliff awaited your next move. The hive thrummed with ancient vigilance, and the shadow, elusive and unresolved, lingered still, poised on the edge between silence and storm. You shifted your weight once more, each grain of gravel beneath your boots grinding sharply, the brittle sound scraping quietly through the thinning air. The shadowy figure had vanished, swallowed by the rocky folds that folded into the cliff's jagged spine, as if the very stone had swallowed its presence whole. Your breath caught in the hollow of your chest, steadying, each exhale tasting the mingled salt and smoke that hovered faintly on the dusk wind. The world felt precariously balanced, suspended between fading light and stretching darkness, every sense alert to the slightest shift. The sun's last muted glow faded, seeping from behind clouds like slow spilling ink bleeding into the horizon, leaving the sky a canvas of cool blues and gray shadows. Around you, the dry vines quivered with the restless breeze, a faint susurration like whispers threading through the brittle leaves. Your fingers brushed the worn stone, coarse and stubborn beneath your palm, its many tiny fissures, a labyrinth of time etched in rock. The hive's steady drone had softened, folding into night's quiet, yet its tension pulsed faintly in your bones, as though guarding secrets unseen. You inhaled deeply, drawing in the sharp bite of salt, tangling with a smoky residue that clung to the air like a slowly dying ember's breath. Beneath this overlay, a faint earthiness lurked, the scent of dry herbs crushed beneath your boots and the brittle resin that oozed faintly from sun-scarred branches tangled in the cliffside cracks. Each scent layered one over another, weaving an ancient tapestry that whispered of endurance, danger, and an uneasy stillness. With deliberate care, you stepped forward, toes brushing fine dust rather than stone, each movement slow, sacred, a delicate negotiation with the terrain. Every crack tested your balance, every ledge bore the weight of cautious will. The brittle vines scraped faintly at your skin, a soft touch like ghostly fingers, urging you onward but warning against haste. The sky above deepened toward indigo, shadows drawing long fingers that stretched across the rugged landscape in slow arcs, folding the world beneath their quiet embrace. Then, from the cliff face just ahead, the low, persistent tapping returned, irregular and halting, a quiet Morse code whispered against stone. Your pulse, quickened involuntarily, muscles spooling tight beneath your weathered skin. The sound was unmistakable, layered over the distant sigh of the restless sea, its endless cadence both comforting and alien. A quiet temptation pulling your attention toward the unknown. You edged closer, every motion measured, heart beating slow as the ancient rhythm vibrating beneath your boots. The honeycomb loomed just above, its dark cavities faintly shimmering in the last light. Each cell a silent promise and threat molded together. The subtle quiver of the hive, no longer just the bees, but something more. A restless pulse radiated outward, like a slow heartbeat echoing through the stone itself. Your hands tightened around your tools, the rough cloth bindings pressing into tender skin, raw from countless climbs. The air thickened, the humid residue of resin and salt curling around your senses like a soft trap. A stray leaf, brittle and faded, floated down, a tiny flake of decay descending into the silent space between you and the hive's hidden heart. Your glance flicked back toward the sea's restless horizon, catching a swift ripple across the waves. A dark shape moving with deliberate slowness beneath the surface, elusive, unreadable, as if the ocean itself held its breath in silent watch. The distant tapping faltered again. A hesitant pulse, now trembling on the edges of your understanding, as if the cliff whispered secrets you had yet to grasp. Behind you, a sudden hush seemed to settle like a cloak, drawing the ambient sounds into a thin thread of silence. The wind softened, the brittle leaves stilled. Your breath slowed, weighted by fatigue and a flicker of something like understanding. The figure you had seen lingered not far off, watching still, its presence no longer merely a shadow, but a question, a quiet challenge folded into the dusk. Your body held suspended between motion and stillness, pain and calm, the fragile thread of life that tethered you to this ragged edge. The cliff beckoned with its silent, unyielding promise. Every scrape of stone and whisper of wind, a reminder of the delicate balance between persistence and surrender. A sudden flicker caught the corner of your eye, a flash of metal shining faintly against the dimming stones, brief and elusive as a shard of moonlight caught in twilight. Your skin prickled, the old worn caution flaring sharply to life. The tapping ceased entirely, swallowed suddenly by the gathering night, that pooled thick and impenetrable around you. The sea below sighed long, and lo, a slow, mournful breath that seemed to stretch across time itself. The hive's faint murmur pulsed one last, slow beat against the stone, then faded into silence, united with the night. The shadow lingered still, poised between flight and stillness, between the known and the unknowable. And in that charged quiet, you understood. The hunt was far from over. The night had deepened, swallowing the last remnants of twilight, even as your muscles tensed against the chill that crept quietly between your worn garment and skin. The ocean below whispered endlessly, a slow pulse of waves rubbing against the cliff's base, the sound neither distant nor nearby, but somehow just within your bones. You stood frozen a moment longer, heart pounding a silent rhythm to the ceaseless drone still vibrating faintly overhead. Your eyes were fixed where the shadow had vanished, a space now emptied yet heavy with unseen presence. The stones beneath tightened their grip around your boots, rough and jagged, imprinted with time, yet unforgiving in their hold. The brittle vines clung to the rock face, their dry leaves fluttering a fragile warning against the steady breath of the wind. The scent of salt and smoke lingered thickly now, painting the air with a bitter taste, and beneath it, a subtle web of earthiness, the ghost of crushed herbs, lingering like an ancient memory. Slowly, cautiously, you resumed your movement. Each step was a negotiation of balance. The gravel shifted lightly, a dry crunch that echoed in the hush, swallowed almost immediately by the vast silence surrounding you. The cold air pressed in again, threading cool fingers along your exposed wrists and up your neck. You drew your garment closer, the rough cloth comforting and familiar against the bite of the dusk. Above, the hive pulsed with a quiet insistence. Its dark cells quivered faintly, alive with a restless energy that reached down through stone and bone. The faint thrum reverberated through the cliffside, a muted heartbeat you felt stirring deep beneath your skin. Your fingers traced the edge of a sun-bleached rock, its jagged surface rough and unyielding, grounding you to the slow, fragile grip of reality. The tapping resumed, erratic now, wavering between confident thuds and hesitant whispers. It was a strange sort of Morse, carried on the wind like a secret call meant only for the night. You held still, senses straining to catch a shape or sound you could barely grasp. Somewhere beyond the cliff's sharp edge, a darkness moved, low and deliberate, weaving silently in the growing blackness. You stepped forward with deliberate care, feeling the tiny give of loose earth beneath your boots, the brittle rush of leaves snapping faintly with each measured motion. The scent of burning wood curled its way inward again, different now, sharper, rawer, like a warning tangled into the night air. There was something here, beyond the bees, beyond the rocky heights, a presence watching, waiting patiently in the shrinking glow. Your hands tightened around your tools, the fabric of the bindings digging gently into calluses, hardened by endless days like this. The rough texture was a small comfort, an anchor to steady your wandering focus. Every detail drew your attention. The shimmer of resin on broken branches, the brittle whisper of vines scraping the cliff face, the cool breath of salt air catching in your throat. The world contracted to these points of sensation, a slow dance of survival where every moment thickened with significance. An uneasy stillness settled around the hive, as if it itself held its breath in silent vigil. The honeycomb pulsed steady but unchanging, cells dark and swollen. A low vibration folded subtly into the air, less the nervous buzz of bees, more something older and deeper, like the pulse of the stone itself. You swallowed carefully, your throat dry as the scent of earth and ash wrapped around you. The shadow appeared again, not far, slightly lower down the cliff, blurred against the stones, like a shadow stretched long and thin. You held your breath, muscles coiled but unmoving, feeling the slow tick of time tighten into a fine thread. Then the sudden crack of shifting rock, distant but sharp, like the cracking of old bones breaking apart. The hive stirred, its drone deepening into a rumble, a slow storm rolling softly under the surface. The tapping ceased abruptly, swallowed by the rising tension in the air. Your pulse thrummed loudly now, a steady hammer beating beneath your ribs as eyes strained to pierce darkness where stone met sky. The cold wind shifted suddenly, pulling at your garment's edges, carrying the faint trace of smoke mingled with salt and something else, something metallic and cold, gleaming faintly in the slipping light just at the edge of sight. Your gaze snapped toward the flicker, catching the glint of something small and sharp, an edge of metal or glass, briefly touching the dying sun like a whispered threat. The world seemed to hold itself poised, breath held in, icy suspension. Behind you, the cliff's jagged spine whispered faint warnings in shifting rocks and brittle leaves. The night, thick with quiet menace and unspoken challenges, the ocean's endless sigh carried its eternal lament, washing slow and unrelenting against the worn stones below. And in that charged silence, your thoughts still as stone, you understood with a sudden cold clarity. The shadow was patient, waiting for the moment when you would falter. The hunt was no longer just for the hive. Something else watched, learning the steady rhythm of your steps, ready to move when the moment broke. Your fingers curled tightly around your tools once more, the rough cloth bindings a thin shield against the unknown. The honeycomb's dark cells trembled softly, a living heartbeat threatening to burst. You turned slowly, eyes scanning the jagged horizon, the ghostly silhouette of cliffs fading into night. Then, just as the sea whispered its endless curse and the last glow of light vanished, the delicate, almost imperceptible sound of something shifting in the underbrush. Close, deliberate, cut through the stillness like a knife. The cliff held its breath. The hive thrummed with ancient vigilance. And in the darkness, the shadow moved again. Closer, unseen, but undeniably present. You held your breath as the shadow slipped away, swallowed by the dark folds of stone, leaving nothing but the brittle scent of resin and salt lingering in the air. The stiff wind wrapped around you like a cold shroud, its fingers tugging at the frayed edges of your garment, whispering secrets just beyond reach. The distant tapping had ceased, plunging the cliffside into a silence so profound it pressed against your eardrums, filling the space between your heartbeats. Your fingers traced the rough granite beneath your palm, the uneven surface a cold anchor against the tightening coil of unease threading through your chest. The bees above thrummed steadily, their drone a slow pulse woven tightly into the bone of this place, both a warning and a fragile rhythm to steady your thoughts. The faint scent of smoke wove through the salt air again, thin, elusive, like a fading ember reluctant to die. Each stone beneath your boots was a story of slow erosion, once more, dark and swollen now in the dwindling light, cells trembling with an eerie, almost sentient pulse. A ghost of movement caught the corner of your vision, a wavering flicker just beyond the jagged rim. Your breath hitched, slow fingers tightening around your tools until the cloth bindings crept into your skin like a welcome sting. Shadows pooled deeper, swallowing color and sound, turning the world into a palette of muted grays and whispers. The wind shifted, carrying a chill that threaded insidiously through your layered garment, crawling along your bare wrists as if searching for a crack in your defenses. The distant ocean sighed a ceaseless hymn below, its frothy fingers clawing at the cliff's base, steady and unyielding. Somewhere beneath that endless pulse, the faintest ripple broke the surface, a dark shape, deliberate and slow, weaving beneath the restless waves. Unseen but watching, your pulse echoed in kind, slow and cautious, the fragile thread of life tied tightly to this ancient rhythm. The tapping returned, hesitant at first, like a cautious knock on a weathered door, irregular now, an erratic dialogue that prickled your skin. The sound seemed to pulse in tandem with the hive's low hum, both a code whispered on the air and a summons into the unknown. You forced your gaze away from the honeycomb, scanning the harsh terrain, every crevice and crack a potential hiding place, every flicker of movement sharpening your senses even further. A brittle leaf fluttered down, spiraling slowly like a weary prayer caught in the last gasp of daylight. You exhaled softly, the sound mingling with the crisp salt air and the faint crackle of dry twigs underfoot, a fragile hymn of survival in a world stripped bare. Your fingers flexed, rubbing the calluses embedded in the rough cloth bindings, each small pressure a reminder of days worn thin by relentless vigilance. The cliff seemed alive beneath your touch, breathing slow and heavy with secrets older than memory. The honeycomb's quiver grew stronger, subtle but insistent. The bee's latent menace wrapped in a rhythm steady as stone. Your gaze flicked to the horizon, catching the slow dance of dark clouds folding into the sea, the sky now shaded in bruised purples and fading blues. The last rays of sun spilled like quiet tears through the gaps, casting narrow beams that trembled across the ragged stones. Then, just as your muscles relaxed into the rhythm, the chill deepened, a shadow untethered, slipping from the periphery of your vision. You turned slowly, heart folding tight within ribs. Like a bird in a cage, a figure stood low against the rocks below, spectral in its stillness, blending into the etchings of stone and wind. The fabric clung and rippled faintly with the shifting breath of dusk, dark as smoke caught in a narrowing shaft of light. Your eyes locked on the faint glimmer, where metal caught in the dying glow. A small sharp edge, a blade, thin and polished, reflecting a shard of sinking sunlight, like a whispered threat. The cliff held its breath with you, the stones silent witnesses to this fragile standoff. The sea's endless song, a haunting lullaby, beneath the sharp crack of a distant shifting stone, echoing through the hollow spaces like an old warning. The hive's drone curved into a slow swell, as if mourning the loss of calm, pressing tightly at your chest, threading tension into every breath you drew. Your body tensed, poised between the hardness of rock and the fragile edge of survival. The shadow waited, fluid and unreadable, as patient as the sea's rhythm, and as relentless as the tide. Your grip tightened on the tools, the rough weave of bindings a thin shield against the mounting unknown. Every nerve hummed alive, attuned to the faint heartbeat of the cliff, the quiver of the honeycomb, and the silent menace coiling unseen in the gathering dark. And then, just beyond the reach of sight and sound, a new rhythm stirred, a faint tapping, a slow, deliberate murmur not born from stone or bee or wind, but from something else, something near, something waiting. Before you could breathe again, that tapping shifted, faster, sharper, a staccato knocking, echoing in the hollow space between rock and dusk. Your ears burned with anticipation, your pulse a hammer striking the fragile edge of silence. The cliff held its breath. The hive thrummed with tense vigilance. And in the gathering blackness, the shadow moved once more, no longer watching from afar, but stepping forward, closer, a silent promise on the wind. You stood still, on the edge, the weight of waiting tethering your limbs. The fading light pressed softly against your skin, its cool touch, a quiet insistence that the day was losing its grip. Somewhere, hidden in the gathering shadows, the figure lingered, patient, watching, unmoving as stone. Your breath was shallow, tasting the salt and smoke that braided thickly in the air, a heavy perfume of time and tension. A whisper of wind stirred the brittle leaves around your feet. The dry shivers scraping against your skin like ghostly fingers. The cliff's jagged face breathed with ancient memory beneath your palms. Each groove and fissure, a quiet conversation you sought to understand without words. The honeycomb above throbbed faintly. The bees drone a slow, steady heartbeat, woven tightly into the air. It wrapped around your shoulders like a cloak, its persistent rhythm reminding you of the fragile margin where patience balanced on the edge of peril. Your fingers tightened their grip on the worn tools, the rough cloth wrappings roughening your skin further, anchoring you to the moment with their familiar press. You moved a slow inch forward, careful to test the hold beneath your boot, the gravel crunching delicate and brittle beneath. The scent of resin curled near, warm and sticky, mingling with the sharp bite of salt and the faint finger of smoke threading through the air. That distant tapping returned, irregular now, hesitant and soft against the stone. It wove into the drone like a subtle Morse, a strange cadence, luring your attention toward the shadowed corners of the cliff. Your eyes flicked toward the sound, catching the muted outline of something shifting low against the rock. The figure's dark fabric fluttered barely perceptibly in the wind, part of the cliff itself, a living shadow hung between dusk and night. You held your breath longer, muscles coiled but still. The cold air bit at your exposed skin, crawling beneath your garments' threadbare edges. The cliff whispered beneath the scraping of brittle vines, their leafless fingers brushing faintly against your wrist. The low hum of the hive thickened, pulsing through the stone like a slow drum under the earth. Your pulse echoed in response, steady and slow, caught between renewal and gathering storm. A sudden flicker of metal caught the dying light, a mere glimmer, sharp and fleeting like a shard of ice melting in the sun. Where the shadow shifted behind a jagged rock, your gaze locked to the glint, heart quickening with a cold spike of caution. The air tightened around you, breath suspended in thin, fragile threads. The tapping ceased abruptly. The world seemed to pause, the silence growing thick and insistent. The ocean sighed below, its endless rhythm a soft counterpoint to the heavy stillness above. The bees' murmur dwindled to a fragile whisper, a slow exhale steeping the dusk with an unspoken warning. You sensed the cliff itself holding its breath, the ancient stone waiting patiently for what was to come. A dry leaf fell between your boots, twirling lazily, its brittle edges catching the last fragments of light before dissolving into shadow. Your eyes swept the horizon, where the sky deepened to bruised violet, blending quietly into the vast, darkening sea. A faint crack echoed from above, subtle, like the settling of a world grown old. and the honeycomb trembled once more, alive, with a restless pulse beneath your touch. Slowly, you shifted your weight, breath steadying beneath the shroud of night. The rhythm of tapping returned, this time sharp, urgent, a staccato beating that sliced through the stillness like a distant warning. The figure moved again, stepping into partial view against the cliff's jagged frame, its shape blurred but deliberate. The wind caught the fabric, lifting it in soft waves, dark as smoke, curling through the twilight. You tightened your grasp, the familiar resistance of the tools comforting against the faint tremor in your hands. The hive pulsed beneath your touch, cells swelling gently with a secret life, a slow heartbeat coupling fear and fragile hope. The sea whispered endlessly, waves folding in and out beneath the cliffs, like slow breaths of an age-old creature asleep beneath the world. The scent of smoke sharpened, twisting through the salt air with a raw edge that set teeth on edge. Somewhere low and distant, the irregular tapping persisted, an urgent pattern weaving its way through the silence and shadows, like a call sent across invisible lines. Your senses stretched thin, every nerve strung taut as the figure paused, the faintest exhale of breath lost to the twilight, the sharp gleam of something cold, metal, glass, or maybe stone, catching light, flickered once more at the edge of sight. A silent challenge folded into the gathering dark. The cliff pressed around you, ancient and brooding, its crags swallowing color and sound into unyielding shadows. The hive's drone bent into a slow crescendo, not wild or frantic, but deliberate. A deep vibration that folded into your bones. A subtle tremor ran along your spine, the fragile thread of focus stretched thin by memory and fear. Your chest tightened, every breath caught between the sea's endless sigh and the quiet menace pressing thick in the cold. Eyes locked on the moving shadow, you knew this place was no longer just a battleground of bees and stone. Something else waited, poised like a breath held deep within the night's folds. A fresh snap whispered from the underbrush, close and deliberate. A dry sound threading steel through wood and bone. The figure shifted again, closer now, its movement slow but unwavering. The last thread of light slid beneath the horizon, bleeding away with a hush like the closing of a long, tired eye. And as the darkness swallowed the cliff whole, the faint, deliberate tapping transformed, faster, sharper, relentless, echoing in hollow spaces between rock and mind. The cliff, the hive, the sea, and the shadow waited, inexorable and patient. You exhaled, the breath a fragile spark in the thickening night, ready to meet whatever silence was coming next. The last light melted silently over the cliff's edge, staining the stones beneath your boots with a soft amber that felt like a benediction. The shadow had vanished into the enfolding dusk. but its presence lingered still, an echo folded into the faint pulse of your own breath. The hive above, once a looming fortress of menace, now settled into a gentle murmur, a quiet respiration that seemed to synchronize with the rhythm of the restless sea below. Your fingers, sore and worn but steady, loosened their grip on the rough-hewn tools. The bindings wrapped tight around your hands, your only shield against the venomous sting, offered a quiet comfort in this final stillness. You lowered yourself carefully onto a smooth ledge, the stone warm and firm beneath you, and allowed yourself a moment to gather the weight of everything carried here. The endless climb, the sharp taste of salt and smoke, the ever-present hum of survival itself. The distant waves whispered an ancient lullaby as the salt-cooled wind brushed past your weathered skin, guiding you back from the brink of exhaustion, without urgency or judgment. In this softening light, the cliffside felt less like a battleground and more like an old companion, enduring, patient, scarred but unyielding, bearing the stresses of time with quiet grace. Your breath slowed, matching the fading cadence of the bee's drone, until it was nothing more than a faint, almost ghostly vibration. The honeycomb's dark cells, so formidable moments ago, now seemed like the fragile remnants of a long, restless dream, waiting, yes, but no longer threatening. The wind tugged gently at the brittle vines, scraped against the rock beside you, their dry leaves rustling like a tender farewell. You'd come here, not just for the hunt, but for the reckoning. A slow dance of defiance against invisible dangers, layered deep within the cliff's carved bones. The figure in the shadows, mysterious as a whispered secret, had been a specter of doubt and tension, a reminder that not all threats wore familiar faces or polished weapons. Yet as that shadow slipped back into the stone folds, the silent promise of danger transformed. It became a vigilant quietness, a mutual understanding between you and the vast, unforgiving landscape. For the first time since dawn, the sky above was vast and open, the heavy gray clouds dissolving into a blanket of stars, slowly awakening. You lifted your gaze, tracing the constellations that shimmered like scattered embers against the deep indigo, timeless, steady, and unwavering. The vastness stretched beyond your worries and fears, folding the day's trials into the universal rhythm of night. Fingers brushed a weathered notch in the granite, the story of countless sunrises enfolded. In its grooves, you traced the carved lines absently, feeling the ancient endurance beneath your touch, a silent testament to survival, carved by wind and wave and the steady perseverance of time itself. It was a reminder that endings were rarely abrupt, but woven from countless moments of persistence. The scent of resin, mixed with the salt air, now held a softer note, a promise of renewal, hidden in the tang of fading smoke. The underbrush below stirred quietly, no longer sinister, but simply alive, a final breath exhaled by this wild place. Somewhere beneath the crashing waves, the sea hummed low and steady, a pulse both ancient and enduring. You sat back, letting your worn back rest against the rough cliff, your eyelids heavy but clear. The twilight shadows ebbed into a comforting darkness, the only light, the faint shimmer of stars and the soft glow of distant fires, markers of lives far from these desolate heights, yet connected through the same endless sky. A gentle warmth radiated from the cloth bindings wrapping your hands, a small comfort among the exposed chill of the night air. Your heartbeat slowed, a steady drum fading into calm, as you exhaled fully and let the long-held tension melt away. The quiet was no longer oppressive, but a balm, an embrace wrapping around the cliffside. The hive, the restless ocean, and you. In this final moment, the cliff no longer demanded a vigil, but granted a reprieve. The bees' hum folded softly into the background, a lullaby carried on the salt wind. The shadow, once sharp and unyielding, had become part of the quiet, a whispered presence, melding with stone and sea. You closed your eyes, the distant tapping now stilled, replaced by the vast silence of night. The steady sigh of the ocean below seemed to cradle the world itself in its timeless arms. The fragile threads of the day unraveled gently, weaving a peaceful tapestry of completion. With your last breath mingling with the salty air, you let yourself drift, not into fear or fatigue, but into a serene surrender to the night's deep calm. The cliff had held its secret, the bees had sung their final verse, and in the slow unfolding dark, you found the whispered end of the hunt, not as a battle lost or won, but as a quiet, enduring peace. The ocean sighed low and endless beneath. The stars shimmered steady overhead, and the world breathed with a gentle grace that carried you softly into sleep.